Okay. Um, so I'm going to start with an apology. It seems to be the flavor of the day today. So I will say I'm sorry that this talk is perhaps not as well edited and prepared as I would like it to be. It's a bit scrambled together from a talk that I'd given last year, and I've sort of not completely smoothed it over. So it's a bit of a scramble, but I'm going to carry on anyway. And if I've missed things out, please ask questions at the end or jump in. I'm very aware, looking through the audience, that there are people amongst us who certainly know as much about Cemlyn's birds as I do, and so it's hard to know how to pitch this. But I'm gonna have a general look through the reserve, and obviously focus a bit on the terns and what we do with the Wildlife Trust. But if I get the pitch wrong, I do apologise in advance. Right, let's start. So I'm going to assume that some people don't know Cemlyn at all. I'll start from that point. So it's one of North Wales Wildlife Trust's 35 or 36, I think we have, reserves now. And it's been a reserve since the beginning of the 70s. It's just turned 50 not long ago as a reserve. And as Nigel said, it's one of our flagship, one of our most high profile reserves, mainly because of its bird life, but it's got a lot else going for it as well. And it's up on the north coast of Anglesey, on that sort of rugged north coast, which has a flavour all of its own, I think. And here's a sort of little map which shows, if I can point it out. This is the area of the reserve. So you've got this thin strip of land called the Esgair Cemlyn, the ridge. Most people know it as just basically a ridge of shingle that was created in the 19th century by a storm. You've got a big bay here, a little peninsula, Trwyn Cemlyn here, some offshore rocks, and then some sort of farmland with wet areas going out towards a farm called Tynllan here, a little area of brackish water off the lagoon here, which is also part of the reserve. But the reserve is mainly the brackish lagoon, the ridge, and a little bit of land and water sticking out here. But as bird watchers, we kind of tend to think of Cemlyn as including all these areas. This is Trwyn Pen Carreg going up towards Wilfa, where the power station is, and Tynllan I've already mentioned. This is the start of Hemborth, and the coastal footpath carries on along there towards Carmel Head. I think we've got an aerial photo there. This is an aerial photo looking from the north, as it were, from offshore. So you can see Trwyn Cemlyn here, peninsula, which has got its own interest. And then you see the nice stretch, the whole kind of, it's got this unique shape, this kind of elliptical shape, the ridge at Cemlyn. And the focus, bird-wise for us anyway, and most of the interest is in these two little lagoon islands just here, and that's where the seabird colony is, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So it's a well-known place locally and for visitors. The ridge is an interesting place for people to walk in itself all through the year. And I think before I say anything else, I would just say if you haven't been to Cemlyn, if you're new to the area, then it's just worth visiting at any time of the year. And obviously, I think it's fantastic for lots of different reasons. But having been there since, well, going there as a lad in the 1980s, and then starting to work there in the early 90s, it's just a place that I always love going to. And I think if you get to know it, it's a place that repays every visit. So I'm just going to go through a bit of the habitat. This is on the ridge itself, and the ridge is designated as a special area for conservation. And and also as a necessary site, partly because of the flora on the ridge, which is unique, and these kind of specialist maritime flowers and plants. This is sea kale, which is a cabbage family plant, which has got amazing thick roots, which you can delve down through the shingle and find water, and it manages to live right down to the strand line on the beach, surviving very harsh, wind, salt, sea, everything. Fantastic plant, very tasty as well, although we shouldn't be picking it because it's quite rare these days. And other things that grow on the ridge, and they seem to be frozen. Hold on a second. For some reason, I don't seem to be able to move on from that picture.
Do you want to maybe just close down the, I've forgotten what it's called, the PowerPoint, and restart it maybe?
Yeah, I might have to do that.
You can stay sharing while you're doing it. So.
Stop sharing for a second. I do apologize.
Don't worry, Ben.
It's okay.
I'm on a new laptop as well, which doesn't help. So I'm kind of finding my way around. Right, let's try that again.
Okay.
There we go. Now I'm working, but I need to share with you. So
yes, please.
Okay. Right. If I do that, and then that. Can everyone see that? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
Sorry for that. I hope that doesn't happen again. But anyway, I'll carry on and hope that it doesn't. Just some more examples of the interesting flowers that you can find on the ridge. This is sea campion. You can see nestling in amongst the shingle. Yellowhorn poppy, which you notice is the shingle ridge itself is a very dynamic land feature, if you like, and it's actually moving inland by a little bit each year, but it also changes dramatically from season to season and from week to week, depending on the direction and the ferocity of storms, particularly winter storms. And if it gets overtopped, which it sometimes does, then you see the specialist plants like Yellowhorn poppy will be the first in to sort of colonize the newly kind of overtopped areas, which is interesting. As it sort of becomes more settled, other things will move in and tend to dominate. But when you've got like a newly kind of dumped bit of shingle, that's where you see the things like Yellowhorn poppy moving in. And it is an interesting, if you've not visited Cemlyn, for a few years and you come back, quite often it will feel different, and that's because the shape of the ridge, the profile of it has actually changed in that time. And certainly now it feels a lot closer to the Lagoon Islands. I don't know if the other people of my age and older have that impression, but thinking back to when I used to work there as a warden in the 90s, or when I went there as a lad, it felt as if the islands were further away, and in fact they were. But also the actual shape of the shelves of the ridge change as well. So there are some birds which try to nest on the ridge, and in the past we have had ring plovers. In the past, several pairs of ring plovers nesting on the ridge itself. This was one back in the 90s when I was wardening, sitting on eggs on the ridge. In more recent years, they have really struggled, to be honest, and I think it's a combination of the change in the shape of the ridge, combined with probably, sad to say, increased pressure from disturbance pressure, basically from people and dogs. And although we put a rope line to protect the terns and other breeding birds along the ridge during the nesting season, there's only so much distance that you can put. You can only put it so close to the high tide mark, and that available space has been squeezed. It's not really the fault of people that they're close to where these birds are trying to nest, but they just haven't really managed to successfully raise chicks in the last few years, although they still are nesting on the coast, on the Trwyn, and sometimes further along as well. So they've still got a foothold, but they're one of those birds which has really suffered from probably greater access to beaches and places where they want to try and nest. But they're fantastic little birds. There's the nest with the amazingly camouflaged eggs, and there's the little chick just out of not long out of the egg, and at that age they still just try and hide, so they'll just hide under a stone in the shingle. Meanwhile, mum or dad is trying to draw you away with the broken wing trick. Amazing parents, the ring plovers. Of course, I'm going to be talking about terns. I'll get onto them later, but just the first thing that hits you when you get on the ridge during the breeding season is the sound, the smell, the kind of spectacle, the sort of the movement, and the kind of the wonderful chaos of a seabird colony, and it's just one of those wildlife spectacles really that you have to experience. I think I'll come back to that. And this is a photo from Steve. Thank you, Steve. There's a few of these that I've borrowed today. I hope people don't mind, because it's a nice picture of a Mediterranean gull, which I wanted to try and mention because I can always forget about them. And this Cemlyn is actually the only place so far that there's been successful breeding of Mediterranean gulls in Wales. I think there's been some down in near Llanelli where they've nested but not raised young. I think that's right. And we continue to have a couple of pairs sometimes which will try and raise young in amongst the colony with the other black-headed gulls. This year there was an interesting, I say this year, 2021, there was an interesting sort of development with a possible hybrid pair, but they're fantastic, really handsome birds, and they started colonizing, started being seen regularly, and then later trying to breed at Cemlyn, in the last 20 years. So it's a special place for that reason as well. And as I said before, it's an interesting place throughout the year for lots of different kinds of birds for various reasons, really. It's an interesting patchwork of habitats, and also where it is on the north coast means that it will tend to be an attractive place for migrants. It tends to get a lot of interesting birds dropping in and moving on. So there's the ridge. This is the Trwyn, and you can see there the sort of classic coastal flora in full bloom. It must be in sort of late May or that sort of time. I think you can see the thrift here, sea pink, Clustog in Welsh, Mary's cushion, because of that nice sort of wad of leaves underneath the flowers, and the sea kale itself in full flower. The smell from that is fantastic, by the way, really sort of honeyish smell, which you can get wafting over sometimes, and bits of sea beet as well there, the coastal path in the distance. And the Trwyn is fantastic for, the odd migrant dropping in sometimes. And then this is towards Tyn Llan, the little inlet of the lagoon, which is good for sort of freshwater birds, really. And then towards Tyn Llan itself, you've got wet areas. You can see that sort of marshy fields in front, and they're also a really good place to look out for interesting waders, passage migrants, and so on, and things like reed bunting, which breed in this area. They're a classic one to see throughout the year, really. And also the hut that we just saw in the previous picture, you can sometimes find this little chap, little owl. I think this is one of Steve Roberts's pictures, so thanks Steve for that. And yeah, he's often there in the pig shed. Used to be more pairs, as I recall, of little owls in the old days. You used to hear them calling when I was staying at Hen Blaas, the warden's quarters. I used to hear them calling regularly from Plas Cemlyn, or from even on top of the building itself there. But they're still clinging on. I think the numbers perhaps have declined because of insect decline, because they eat a lot of insects, and as we know, there's fewer of them around. Also, golden plover. This is obviously in the spring as they're coming into their nice breeding plumage, but they're there often through the winter. Used to often roost on the islands, but these days they seem to prefer the fields on the edge of the Troin, and sometimes you can get quite close and fantastic views, beautiful birds. Often you don't see them until they decide to move, but they're brilliant birds, often in amongst lapwing, curlew. Sometimes godwits will be on those fields as well. Always worth looking out for those kinds of things. This was actually this autumn some pink-foot geese, which are quite rare for Anglesey. I don't see them very often anyway, but this was a decent sized flock just going over. But I think I've heard that more recently there have been a couple hanging around at Cemlyn this winter, so that's an interesting one. So they're always things moving through. Chough will use the area as well, often feeding on the fields or on the Troin. Birds like stonechat love the scrubby areas. Gorse and blackthorn are their favourite habitats. Likewise, whitethroat. I could mention lots of others as well. Grasshopper warblers, mind you, they're difficult to get photos of. Sedge warbler, there's one in the bramble, and you know, lots of good regular sort of breeding summer visitors. Winter can be a good time too, and sometimes along the ridge you get these chaps, the snow buntings. I think they like to feed on the strand line of the lagoon, which is where you get, you know, the seeds washed up, either the sea kale seeds or other dock seeds or whatever that's been washed up, and they'll often see them feeding in that strand line. Don't know if there's been any seen there this year. Steve Cully will probably tell us, but they're quite regular in that area. And moving away from birds, it's also a brilliant place to look out to sea. Very often you can see porpoises, and if you're lucky, you can see, as I did, this one was in the autumn this year. This is a Risso's dolphin, and it came really close. You know, this photo was taken from the shore, okay, with a zoom, but you know, it still was pretty close, and you can see the amazing scars that the Risso dolphins have on their skin. Really fantastic creatures, and they're quite regular in autumn, really, autumn, sort of late summer till autumn period, around the coast of Anglesey, but Cemlyn's a good spot. Also good for reptiles, adders. A few places there traditionally you would try and find them or see them. I think I've seen a decline in the last few years, and maybe others would back me up on that, I'm not sure, but you can still find them, and they hunt the old dry stone walls and the sort of brackeny, scrubby areas around Morfa, which is a part of the reserve not really visited much by people, but it's a good place for reptiles, mammals, and other birds, lizards as well. The lagoon itself has some interesting brackish sort of specialist fauna. A lot of them I don't know the names of because they're all Latin, and they are mollusks and invertebrates and things that I'm not really an expert on. But you also get bigger things like fish. These are the grey mullet, which you can see in big numbers sometimes. But there are also some interesting specialized plants. I think spiral tassel weed is one of the ones which we get in the lagoon, and it's not found in many places because of that unique mix. It's a brackish lagoon, that is, it gets some seawater coming in, but it's also fed by streams and rainwater, so it has a kind of changing salinity, and some things will thrive there. We have freshwater cockles and some other interesting freshwater clams and some other interesting brackish specialists. And it's also a brilliant place for rock pooling, Cemlyn, especially off the more exposed coasts, the Troyn and that area. And this is, thanks Steve again for this photo. This was a Bloody Henry starfish, which we found in a rock pool. One of many really interesting species you can find on a good low tide. This is another one I think that Steve found, a cork-wing wrasse, beautiful fish. I've not found one there, but I have seen them. Lots of different species of fish, lots of different species of crabs. Could go on forever about the rock pool fauna of Cemlyn. It's one of the best places, really. That's just one of my favorites, the sea hare. Incredible creatures. If you ever get a chance to see them, they can sort of change shape at will, and really fascinating to watch moving. Right, let's see if this works. This is another creature that you might not expect to see on the ridge, but in fact, this last summer, this was Cemlyn in 2020, when there was no one else around, and I was one of the lucky people wardening. I saw this chap. So yeah, that was a brown hare, obviously. We kind of knew that they used the ridge. You know, I have seen them before along there, but this one was really, I think he was just really bold because there weren't many people about, or maybe just got used to me being there and not doing much. So he came back past really close. And yeah, the area around Cemlyn is still a stronghold for hares, which is brilliant because they again have declined in a lot of their range. So it's good to see them, and in the spring you can see them chasing and boxing each other around the reserve. Nope, we're doing it again. We don't have to go again. Right, that's not a brilliant photo, but it's fantastic that Steve managed to capture it. And of course, it's an otter, and we are lucky that otters have really come back now. When I was a kid, of course, they were really rare throughout Wales, but now they've come back, and Cemlyn is one of the places where you might be lucky enough to see one. I don't know what time of day this was, Steve, but probably early in the morning. And we know that they use the area around the reserve. There are sometimes issues when it comes to the terns. I'll talk about that later on, but in general, it's just fantastic that otters are about and that you can see one. This was actually obviously on the seaside, but they're also in the lagoon, and probably move around quite widely as well. Right, this is a delve back into history. Talking of rare mammals, this was me back in 1994, when I still had hair and friends. These were the two jackdaws that I kind of adopted while I was there as the warden, and I was very lucky. You know, North Wales Wildlife Trust gave me my first job in this area. I'd been working on Fair Isle before that, came back and was offered a job at Cemlyn, and I can honestly say, without sort of quite honestly, it was one of the best jobs I've ever had. I think just for the sheer enjoyment of being in that habitat every day, and seeing all that wildlife. So it's just a trip down memory lane. But more recently, just to talk about a bit about what I kind of do normally, although everything's been a bit different in the last couple of years, of course. I've been doing a lot of work with schools. I try and take out as many schools as I can to Cemlyn. So over the years, we've taken most of the Anglesey schools and some from Gwynedd out and shown them the the wildlife. Often we do a mixture of rock pooling and bird watching and whatever else is around. But it's you never worry about there being interesting things to see at Cemlyn, and it's always great to see kids being enthused and being inspired by the place. And it's a great sort of way to engage people with nature, I think. So yeah, kids of all ages. I think these are secondary school, getting their first glimpses of the terns. I usually try and ask them to guess how many terns there are. And we also work with the summer wardens, and of course at Cemlyn we employ 2 summer wardens every breeding season, mainly to look after the terns, to monitor them, to protect them, but also to engage with visitors and to talk to people, give information, and and they help out with the schools as well. This was Tarek a few years ago, who was a brilliant sort of communicator with groups, and it was really, it's always really nice when you get out to Cemlyn, see the wardens, hear what they've been seeing, what's been happening, and it's a great sort of outdoor social kind of connection on the ridge. We try to keep at least one person on the ridge throughout the sort of daylight hours in the breeding season, so that they can keep an eye on what's happening. But they're also there, of course, for people, so people can come and ask what the birds are, have a look through the telescope, and so on. So yeah, we get up to a lot of fun with the kids. This is sort of a impromptu art session on the beach with limpet shells. In Welsh, the word for a limpet is llygad maharen, which is a ram's eye. So they kind of these lads sort of took that sort of quite literally and got quite inventive with it. Some more rock pooling with families, and we've also done things like bio-blitzes. The Cemlyn Creature Count is what we call the sort of family bio-blitz events, which we have run occasionally over the years. All been really popular, and Steve Cully's often helped with them, and just try and see as many species as you can. Obviously the birds kind of they kind of record themselves virtually, but you can see a lot of other things, and if you can get some botanists or entomologists involved, then you can really rack up for scores. So always good fun. And people recording is really a big part of what we do at Cemlyn, and we've got data sets now on stuff going back, well, till the 1980s at least, where it was first properly wardened. So there's lots of interesting trends to look at there, and lots of records to look at over the years. And it's also attractive to people who want to make programs, film, photograph. This was Spring Watch when they came and were based on the ridge or at Cemlyn for a week. This was Aled recording for Radio Cymru. They've been out a few times and done some recordings in situ. Very atmospheric sort of place. So it's and what's wonderful about it is is how close you get to the bird. So I think as a wildlife spectacle for seeing terns, I would say it's probably one of the best places in Britain, because you are so close. You can see from this picture, the terns often come in at eye level, depending on the direction of the wind or whatever, but they are often in amongst you as you're standing on the ridge, and that's that sense of just being really enveloped by the movement and the dynamism of these amazing birds. Right, let's get onto the main course then. Species. These are the black-headed gulls, of course, and they're often overlooked, but they're a really important part of the ecology of the seabird colony at Cemlyn. And they are fantastic defenders of the nest. You can see from, I think I've got 3 pictures here, and they've all got their mouths open. They're always making a noise, and that's probably a really good thing, obviously for their own chicks, but also we think for the terns as well. And I'm doing the species in order that they arrive. The black-headed gulls arrive first. They arrive usually, well, they're sort of around in March really, but they start settling early in April, and and start getting established and defending territories and building nests such as they are. So they kind of get in there first, and they are, like I said, really fierce defenders of the nest, and that's a quality that the Sandwich terns particularly, we think, benefit from. And we have usually around about 200 pairs at Cemlyn breeding on an average year. It's been more in the past, but that's been an average of the last few years. Okay, now this is, as Nigel said, this is the most important species in terms of our responsibility internationally, probably. At Cemlyn, this is a sandwich tern, really powerful, elegant, large tern, wonderfully long-winged and flexible flight. And they really only nest at Cemlyn in Wales. The nearest other colonies are in Southern Ireland, in Wexford, or in Cumbria, at Hodbarrow, or in Northern Ireland. So, that's the sort of the spread. Wales is really represented just by Cemlyn as far as this species goes. And we have been averaging numbers of sandwich terns nesting that put it in the sort of between 10 and 20% of the UK population. So that's a big, important chunk of that population, and it gives us, a lot of responsibility to look after them, and to consider their future and what will happen if there are changes at Cemlyn as well, because they have to breed somewhere, and that's a lot of terns. Yeah, you can see from this picture, this is, a breeding adult. Just about make out the yellow tips to the bill, black bill, very pale plumage, not as long a tail as the other terns, but that powerful shape and long black bill. Can't really see the crest in that, but you see that in other pictures. And then this is one of my favorites, the Arctic tern, beautifully sort of proportioned bird, much smaller, grayer, all red bill, and long tail, and buoyant flight. It's hard to sort of convey from photos the sort of jeers of a bird, but they do have a very sort of floaty flight, which you can sometimes distinguish from common terns, which they're very similar to. So yeah, there's the Arctic terns. You can see like the underwing, this kind of trailing edge has a thin, dark trailing edge, but otherwise pale wing, and from above very pale, and that is a contrast to common tern. So you see in a minute. Here's the common tern, black tipped bill, again red bill with red legs, but slightly more dark on the wing, and a slightly different jeers. There's sort of view from underneath, and I'll get into the numbers of them later, I think, because there's been some interesting changes in the last year or two. But here, just when we're into ID, I managed to find a picture where there's two of them together. So this bird up on the left is a common tern, and you can see that kind of wedge shape mark on the primaries of the wing when it's flying like that. And that in contrast, here's an Arctic tern, and it's a much cleaner, paler wing. You can sort of make out, the Arctic terns are slightly longer tailed, slightly, more buoyant flight, I would say. But they're subtleties, and to be honest, they are very similar. And for convenience, a lot of people just lump them together and call them comic terns. And for sort of recording purposes, sometimes that's necessary. And that shows you just the difference in the size between sandwich tern and an Arctic, and also the color. You can see how pale the sandwich tern is in comparison to an Arctic. And then we have to mention a very special tern, which used to nest at Cemlyn. When I was wardening in 1994, we still had a couple of pairs, I think that was the last year that they successfully bred, though. I managed to get rid of them. I think they tried in 1995 but failed. And basically, this is a roseate tern. A really beautiful seabird, it has to be said. You know, very pale, silvery almost back, and very pale underneath. Sometimes with a beautiful roseate flush, pinky flush. That's where they get the name. Very long tail, all black bill at the beginning of the breeding season, and then as the season goes on, they get increasingly more patches of red on the bill. Very long, orangey red legs, well, very long for a tern legs, and characteristic call as well, which you can sometimes pick up as they fly into Cemlyn amongst the noise, the background noise of Arctic common and sandwich. But fantastic birds, very rare, one of Europe's rarest seabirds. Although thanks to fantastic conservation work, they are now one of the few seabirds which has been on a consistently upward curve, really, in the last few decades. Although concerns perhaps that that there are too many eggs in one or two baskets, so the range has definitely declined. But there are birds that used to nest in several places around Anglesey, and in considerable numbers as well, but became much rarer. They suffered as a result of the millinery trade in the early 20th century, people hunting for the plumes, the tail feathers for ladies' hats. But also, like other birds, like other terns, suffered as a result of greater access to beaches by people. And also, they have an interesting range, roseate terns. They nest in the Caribbean, the Seychelles, North America. But we're a kind of a bit of an outlier. The UK and Ireland is a kind of an outlying few colonies, and they have interesting, different sort of ecology, I would say, to some of the other terns. But yeah, there's to give it its name. So because they're one of the rarest terns, there's been a lot of concerted efforts, really, by different organizations in Europe to try and help conserve them and to try and bring those populations back up. So we've been involved. North Wales Wildlife Trust has been one of those involved in the Roseate Tern Life project, which has brought together lots of other organizations. There we are. It's a bird that attracts logos. So Birdwatch Ireland in Ireland, which I've also worked for on roseate tern colonies there. They hold the biggest colony now in Europe of roseate terns at Rockabill, which is a tiny little lighthouse island north of Dublin, where I was lucky to spend the summer back in the 90s as well. But that now holds over 1,000 pairs of roseate terns, which is fantastic. When I was there, it was less than 500. So they're doing well there. And we know that the birds that used to nest on Anglesey in the 90s, that some of them, if not all of them, moved over to the Irish colonies, principally Rockabill. And we know that from ring reading data. But also the National Park Service in Ireland are responsible for the Ladies Island Lake colony down in County Wexford, where I was also lucky enough to warden for a summer. And the RSPB have been doing fantastic work, well, across the UK, but also in Northern Ireland and on Anglesey, on the Skerries, where roseate tern pairs have occasionally bred in recent years, or tried to. So it's a really concerted effort. And in fact, I was talking today to Ken Morris from the RSPB, who's sadly leaving us now to go and live in Malta, but he's been working for the RSPB for a good long time now. And I was just saying, it's so nice that the roseate tern project and the terns in general has been so nice, because it's brought together all these different conservation organizations in a really genuinely collaborative, information sharing and supportive way to just try and help these species, and I think that's really inspiring. I think more conservation should be done like that, in this kind of interregional collaborative way, and it's really, I'm really glad to have been involved in that over the years. This is a picture from when I was at Rockabill, actually, of a roseate tern in flight. Just you can see the sort of beautiful long tail streamers there, which really stand out when they're flying. And this was from last year at Cemlyn, where we actually did see two coming in together. I got very excited seeing a pair of roseates coming in. Sorry, it's not a very good photo, but you know, every year since the 1990s, some roseates have turned up at some point, and they always get us excited, thinking that maybe this will be the year that they'll come back. And obviously we spend a lot of effort trying to make Cemlyn as attractive as possible. I'll talk about that in a minute, the sort of conservation measures we go to, but they flirt with us. This was last year, thinking, oh, maybe they're gonna come in and start breeding again. But they certainly are aware of Cemlyn. They're aware that there's a colony there that could be a potential place for them to breed, I think. And this is a video, which is a fantastic video taken by Mark Sutton from this year, from 2021, I should say. And I will try and play it now. And this shows an interesting behavior which we were observing, which was a possible hybrid pair, basically, between a roseate and a common tern. And this is something that's been observed on the skerries as well, where there was a sort of regular roseate common hybrid pair for a few years, I think, on the skerries. Although I think, interestingly, these two were different birds. We don't think these were the same ones from the rings. We don't think that these were the same birds that were paired with each other on the skerries. But it's really interesting anyway, and I'll just play the clip if it works. And there we go, job done. The love gift, as we interpret it, this sand eel that's been offered, and the roseate took it, and beautiful. I mean, the courtship dance of terns is just really beautiful to watch, and also there you got to see, you know, compared, sitting next to each other, the beautiful. You can see the slight blush, sort of peachy blush on the roseate, which is more evident when they are in sort of full breeding plumage at the beginning of the season like that, and the all black bill, you know, so they're looking really, really smart, and you can see the difference there with the common tern. Right, oh, it's going to go again, sorry. Okay, it's worth watching it again, but I think I should move on. This was a photo that was sent in to us because somebody thought it might be a hybrid, you know, an actual hybrid common roseate, as it were. But I think my feeling was just that this was a roseate. I mean, it has the bill shape of a roseate. It has the mantle, albeit, you know, the color could look a bit different, different light. The only thing that perhaps wasn't right was that the tail didn't look long enough, but then that can be deceptive, or it could have just had its tail streamers frayed or worn or pecked by a peregrine. I don't know. I think it is just a roseate, but I am willing to be corrected by people who are sharper on ID than I am. But that looks like a roseate to me. Okay, we should talk about other terns, but actually, I don't have very up-to-date pictures. This is one. This is a rare tern. Obviously, this is a sooty tern from 2005. When there was one that turned up and was around all summer, or well, not all summer, it was around for a while at the colony. a rare bird in Europe, but obviously quite a common bird internationally, and mostly sort of tropical in range. But you know, Cemlyn over the years has attracted nearly all the terns. If you look in the bird book, I think there are still a few that we haven't had yet. But you know, the list is quite long of rare terns that have turned up at Cemlyn. I'm told there was one there this summer as well, but I'm afraid I don't have a picture of it. That's really sad, isn't it? There was an elegant tern at Cemlyn this year. I didn't get to see it, I'm afraid, to my shame, but I'm sure Steve Cully's got a brilliant photo of it somewhere. I forgot to ask him for it, I'm sorry. But yeah, it does attract, naturally it will attract other terns to a large tern colony. This poor sooty tern was really given quite a racist reception, I would say, because the other terns really didn't treat it like a tern. They seemed to treat it as if it was a I don't know, a predator, a skewer, or something. They really mobbed it. They weren't willing to accept it. And even though the sooty tern was obviously getting triggered to you know, its sort of parent instincts were being triggered. It was trying to feed sandwich tern fledglings and so on, but the adult sandwich terns were generally hostile and you know, gave it quite a hard time. I felt really sorry for it. Anyway, that's the way it goes. I hope he got back somewhere to, you know, Seychelles or wherever he was really wanting to be. And this is what happens when you get a sooty tern, is it creates a twitch event. This was you know, some of the guys that turned up, and girls who turned up to watch this sooty tern. Some of them had come, you know, straight from the Scilly Isles or the Hebrides and just got in the car, because I think at that time nobody'd seen a sooty tern for a long time, so it was a big one, as they say. And it led people a dance as well. It went out to the Skerries, and then it came back, and then people who'd gone out to the Skerries on a boat were sort of trapped in the bay at Cemlyn, where the bird was on the island. So the bird was on the ridge could see it, but the ones in the boat trapped in the bay couldn't see it. And it was sort of one of those amusing, in retrospect, twitch kind of moments. And this is what it looks like, you know, at the beginning of the season, when the ground's all bare and the sandwich terns are massing, and it's just, you know, it's getting ready for the season. And you know, you get that sort of, I don't know, I get a kind of it's almost like a drug, where when you see the light reflecting off terns' wings and you hear the sound and the sort of movement, it actually lifts my spirits in a kind of, in a physical way. Yeah, I will stop going on about that now, but it's a fantastic sort of inspiration, I think, when you're out there. And I think this is a clip which will hopefully just show, yeah, this shows the kind of traffic of sandwich terns in and out during the sort of chick rearing period. So when there's lots of birds that need food, you're just seeing loads of birds in and out. You can hear the noise, or at least I hope you can, and you can just see the sheer volume of parent terns in and out all through the day, finding food for those chicks and locating their chicks by sound, which is amazing. You know, how can they recognize their mum or their chick in amongst all that hubbub? But they do, and it's incredible. And it kind of, when you're there wardening all day and you're watching them, it kind of, what really hits you is, especially when the weather is bad and they have to battle against the wind sometimes to get in or to get out, and they really, you know, you can see the energy that they're exerting to go and find food for these chicks and get chicks get the sand eels into their chick. You know, you see that desire, and you're aware of just how powerful that drive is, that, you know, that reproductive drive, that parental drive, and it's you know, it's really tangible. Right, so how do we know how many terns are out there? Well, we have to go out and count them. So this is a regular annual, hopefully annual event, which we undertake usually towards the end of May, beginning of June, where we will go out and actually physically count the nests. And we've done it in the same way for decades now, with the same methodology, with a very much mindful of minimizing disturbance. So we always reduce, we always make sure that the count is done in less than 50 minutes. That's the sort of maximum time, and also that we do it in good weather conditions, so that chicks are never chilled or wetted or in any danger. And we get in, count as much as we can, and get out again. So this is us walking out, and you see it's only really when you go out like this that you see the extent of the colony. When the vegetation's high, it's easy to sort of miss all the terns that are sitting on eggs or on chicks. And then when they go up, you just realize, wow, that is how many birds there are there. And then we get out there. This is the birds reacting to the first sort of humans stepping out onto the ridge, onto the island, sorry. And yeah, this is, if you wanted a job, and this is another way you could do it. It's just by counting the birds in this photo. But yeah, that's quite a tall order. And yeah, we would sometimes revert to that if we are unable to carry out a count in the right sort of window of opportunity, which does sometimes happen. If there's bad weather in early June and we don't get it done, we have to revert sometimes to making estimates. But that just shows you the sort of scale of the colony. And there's us coming back out, and you can see the birds almost immediately starting to settle back onto the nest. So that's always reassuring to see, to know that they've, whilst they've been up in the air while we've been counting, as soon as we're coming out, they're going back. They're not going to be deserting the colony. And we've consistently seen that behaviour, and a lot of the older, more experienced terns will probably have experienced this themselves many times in previous seasons. Terns can live up to 30 or 40 years. They're quite long-lived, as many seabirds are. So we know from ring reading data that they can keep coming back and back to the same colony sometimes. And when we're out there, what we're actually doing is recording the nests, and we do that usually by dropping a piece of pasta next to the nest. That's just to make sure we don't count it twice, and then obviously it's biodegradable, doesn't do any lasting harm, but it's a way of making sure that we haven't double counted. They usually do it in pairs, so there's one person with the pasta shouting out sandwich 1, sandwich 2, common 3, whatever, and the other person scribing, and making sure we don't step on things, which is easy to do because they're so well camouflaged and tucked in amongst the clumps of sea beet or other vegetation. And sometimes we time it such that when we go out and do the touch count, sometimes the first sandwich tern chicks are just literally hatching while we're out there, which is an amazing privilege to witness, to see that sort of first life coming out of the egg. And so we've got data now going back, as I said, right back to the 80s, which shows the fortunes of the different species at Cemlyn. And of course the sandwich terns, yeah, they really only started properly nesting back in the early 80s. I think there were some in the 70s, but no, they properly got established at Cemlyn anyway in the early 80s. And low numbers. No, there were some in the 70s, sorry, but then they started building up. But you can see classic sort of tern boom and bust. You have sort of peaks and troughs, and they had some tough times, sometimes in response to predation events. Sometimes there may have been falls for other reasons we're not really quite sure. But then since the turn of the millennium anyway, there's been a really healthy sort of general trend upwards, to the point where I think we had the top year was, I think, if I'm right, it was 2014, where we had over 2,500 pairs of sandwich terns, which is absolutely fantastic. And as I said, it's over 10% of the population of the UK, and a significant part of the world population as well. I think the other big colonies are in Kent and some in Ireland, and but you know, on the west of the UK, that we are the biggest colony. So it's really important that we kind of keep the conservation work going. You can see that after that big peak, there was a severe sort of drop after 2017. Went right down to 500 pairs again, and then back up. And that was as a result of, in 2017, problems with predation and disturbance by otters, which we had to address with the use of electric fencing the following season. But since then, touch wood, since we've been putting the electric fencing, we haven't had issues with otters. The otters are still around, and we love seeing them, but they haven't been, as far as we can make out, a direct threat to the colony since then. And encouragingly, we've seen the numbers picking up, and I think, yeah, the figures for 2021 aren't there, but I think we were back up to just under 2,000 pairs at the clutch count, although there were more birds coming in after that. So probably there were over 2,000 pairs last summer at Cemlyn, which is right back up there in the sort of good numbers in terms of the last 10-year average, I'd say. So yeah, it's a really important colony for sandwich terns. Sorry, I didn't have a chance to make a proper slide for this, but this is just to give a sketch of the other species. So 2019, yeah, you can see the sandwich terns up there, 1,500 pairs. Arctic and commons, that was about average for the last 10 years, sort of, you know, maybe 30 to 40 pairs combined, more Arctics and commons. But then you can see in 2020 that suddenly changes drastically, and there's a story behind that figure there of, you know, circa 800 combined Arctic and common terns is a big sort of big change, and there's a story behind that. I'll come onto that in a bit. But the black-headed gulls stay more or less constant at around about 200 pairs, and then this last season, as you can see, just short of 2,000, but probably more than that once you consider the late nesters, and the Arctic and commons much increased on this sort of average, but much decreased after that amazing year in 2020. Okay, right, 2020. So 2020 I will talk about briefly because it was an interesting year for lots of reasons. We couldn't employ wardens that year on site because of COVID regulations, so I was one of the lucky people who got to go out because we needed to keep the site wardened. We had to go out on a daily basis and cover the sort of wardening duties day by day. So I was one of the lucky people who was out there at Cemlyn pretty much on my own all day, just me and the wind and the terns. And later on, when the restrictions eased, sometimes Steve Cully, because he could walk there from his house, but usually it was just me. And this was kind of what it was like early on in the season, because it was northeasterly winds for about a month, as I recall. Let me just play this. Yeah, that's just a short clip, very boring, but it just sort of brings it back. Lots of wind, no people, and yeah, really cold actually as well, despite the sun. And then something happened later on in the season there. So it got through to about late May, early June, and then suddenly we started seeing loads more Arctic terns, you know, and not just a few, like significantly bigger numbers of Arctic terns coming around the colony. And it turned out that what had happened was that because of the pandemic, really, skerries, which is the offshore islands just north of Anglesey, between Cemlyn and Holyhead, and the major Arctic tern colony, I think it's the biggest Arctic tern colony in the UK now. You know, up to 3,000 pairs, and basically because there were no people in here at the lighthouse, the peregrines became much more happy to be there, you know, to sort of set up residence. Basically, I don't think they were nesting, but they were just basically resident around the lighthouse area, and because of that, I think they just caused so much disturbance to the terns, as well as direct predation. But I think it was mainly the disturbance of having peregrines, you know, 24/7, that the whole colony just decided to up and leave. So they kind of deserted the skerries, and as terns do, they look for plan B, and it wasn't too late in the season for them to try again, so they came to Cemlyn, and we saw, like I said, between 800 and 900 at least more pairs. You know, that's extra pairs of Arctic and commons, mostly Arctic, but you know, but a lot of common in there as well, turning up at Cemlyn and setting up to breed. So we had this extraordinary year where, you know, the islands, which are not big islands, you know, you'll see yourselves, or you may know it, but you know, you'll see yourselves when you come and see, they're not big in area, but they became absolutely full of terns, you know, and we saw terns nesting in places which we hadn't seen terns nesting in before, and they were it was really densely packed with birds. And I think we calculated at a certain point in the season that if you take into account the fledglings and chicks as well, we could have had over 10,000 individual terns on the island, you know, at Cemlyn at any time. So that's incredible to think about. But yeah, it was an unusual year, and we were just fascinated to see whether they would manage to be successful in breeding, and the indications were that they did manage to raise a lot of fledglings. So, you know, the late nesting wasn't a problem. They did manage to get chicks off, and you know, it was fascinating to see then what would happen, you know, this last year in 2021, whether they would come back or not. This is a clip. How much is for time? Just showing them all preening on this is when they first came in, and they're all just loafing around the edges of the island on the bricks, and waiting to decide whether to nest. But then later on, they definitely got down to it. And there's a combined flock in action. So then we wanted to see whether they would come back this year, as in 2021. So we did another count. This is me with some of the members of the youth forum who are very active volunteers, coming up doing the count this year, and we saw bigger numbers of Arctic terns, but not as many. So we know that, and liaising with the RSPB, we knew that, you know, numbers had gone back up in the skerries. So a lot of them did go back to the skerries, but a significant number, and interestingly, a higher proportion of common terns decided to come and stay at Cemlyn. So that was interesting, and it's also encouraging for us, because a lot of the conservation work that we do at Cemlyn is focused around trying to boost the numbers of common terns, specifically because we know that that's what roseate terns like. They like to be amongst common terns. So we're trying to encourage common terns as much as we can, and this was encouraging in itself. And the fact that we had a roseate common hybrid pair, possibly, although we don't think that they actually produced eggs or young, but it's encouraging that possibly they might start thinking about breeding at Cemlyn again in years to come. Right, I'm aware that I'm going on a bit now, so I'm going to just zoom through. This is us doing some of the conservation work at Cemlyn. It's really important that we monitor and regulate the water level of the lagoon so that it's high enough to you know, to allow the ingress of salty water from the sea, but also that during the summer months that it doesn't go up too much and flood out the islands. So we put in stop logs in the weir. The lagoon was, is a man-made feature, really, but made by Captain Vivian Hewitt, who lived in the big walled house at the back there in the 1920s, 30s, and he put in the first weir. We've put in more recently, a weir system there to regulate the water level, and we put the stop logs in at the beginning of the season to make sure the terns don't get flooded out. And we also take out nest boxes for the terns, specifically to try and attract roseate terns who like a bit of shelter for their chicks. So this is us taking out roseate tern nesting boxes. The other terns will use them as shelters from predation or from bad weather as well. Carrying them out, we either wade out or go out, take out boats and put the boxes out in different formations every year, hoping that we'll attract them. This is what they nest in on Rockabill largely, and the wardens have had to find different ways of stacking the boxes to try and maximize the number of potential sites on Rockabill, but they do literally nest in rows, in terraces, just like that. So we thought we'd try that. But so far we haven't had much success in getting them back, but we live in hope. And also put in the fence line. Let's get Freon working here. Come on, knocking it in. And putting in the logos on the fence posts to let people know that they need to stay on the ridge side, on the beach side of the ridge, to protect the terns and the potential nesting birds, oyster catchers or ring plovers. Fantastic young people who come out and volunteer with us. This is the Bangor University Conservation Society, who came out and did a brilliant day with us. And if people are interested in volunteering, I will make a plug for it here and now. You will be very, very warmly welcomed by the Wildlife Trust. We are always looking to get people coming out, both to do this kind of practical work, but also wardening, if people can help with monitoring the birds and coming out doing feeding studies or recording birds and other wildlife, or even crunching the numbers. If you're good at that, we're always looking for people who can help us make use of our big data set. So there's lots of different ways you can get involved with Cemlyn, and it's a great place to get people on the ladder of the conservation sector, as it did for me. I was lucky to work there as a young guy, and it really helped me gain experience and go on to do other things as well. So yeah, it's a good opportunity like that. One thing we've done recently, as I was saying, to try to put out rafts to increase the potential nesting area for common terns and maybe attract roseates. Common terns do use rafts in other places, so we thought it was worth a try. And this past year was the first time we did see some common terns using rafts, which was exciting because they've been out for a few years and not had any luck. We think we might try and expand it and basically get a bigger area. These, 3 of these rafts put together, but I think we could really a bigger area. I think, and long term, we are thinking, because the effects of climate change will affect sea level rise and storm frequency, may well mean that the ridge at Cemlyn is overtopped more often, and that the lagoon islands may not be sort of secure long term. So we have to think about what will happen if that becomes a reality. Where can terns nest as a plan B, and rafts is one potential option. Whether we create other islands further back in the lagoon, or whether we try and think about another site on Anglesey that we could try and attract terns to. These are all things we need to consider, because long term, we have to realize that probably Cemlyn is going to change, because it's so close to that water level, that higher water level mark, which is going to be shifting. So yeah, the rafts is an important part of that. We put out little decoys, which may or may not work. I'm not sure that they're the most artistically accurate tern decoys, but we put them out And like I said, last summer they were used for the first time, which was encouraging. There we are. I think that's Henry Cook helping us take out the rafts with some nest boxes on tow. And we've also done, conservation work on the islands, changing the nature of the substrate. Certain areas get flooded, so we try to fill them in with shingle and make it more nesting areas, and remove some of the bigger clumps of sea beet sometimes as well, to try and again open up areas for nesting. This is what it looks like at the beginning of the season when there's no vegetation hardly, after it's been blasted by winter storms and so on. And you can see the nest boxes out, a few sandwich terns, and this is just what they get up to at that time. Sorry, rubbish video of mine, but just it shows you the sort of dancing that they get up to. Really fascinating behavior to watch at that time. And when the vegetation is low like that, it's also a good time to try and read rings, which I'll come on to in a minute. And then as the season goes on, you get more and more birds and more vegetation, obviously getting good fertilizer from the guano. And the smell at Cemlyn is a very characteristic thing as well. I would say it's part of the experience. Myself, I love it, but not everyone's cup of tea. Tern flock building up. This was again from 2020, where you can see that massive group of Arctic and common terns swirling around. This is a dread, so this is what happens. This is a rubbish video, but it just shows you what happens when the birds go up in response to a perceived or imaginary threat. So this is, normal sort of behavior, birds sitting on eggs or sheltering chicks from rain. There's a chick getting fed, all very normal. And then at a certain point, I think you suddenly see a kind of a change in the behavior. Let's see. Yeah, so the next up, something's happening. Oh, is it a real thing? Yes, it is. And they all go up. And it's only really at that point, as I said, that you realize just how many birds there are there, because they're partly hidden by the vegetation. And suddenly they all go up, swirl around. And if it's nothing serious, the sandwich terns in particular will soon be back down on the eggs or chicks. They don't really get involved in much of the defense of the colony. But it could be something real. This is a mass dread in response to that, which is which is a peregrine, and that really will cause a big disturbance. And the peregrines do come in and they do predate terns. It's part of their kind of menu of birds that they will take. It's not a significant, so it hasn't been so far a significant number of birds that we get very worried about, but it can, as was shown on the skerries, it can cause problems if the disturbance is sort of repeated and long term. So we try and discourage the peregrine without obviously we can't and we don't want to actively repel it in any sort of violent way, obviously, and we're certainly not going to destroy peregrines. That's totally off the menu, but we try and discourage it from hanging about too much if we can. And similarly, ravens who come in this year, this last spring, there were a pair of ravens that were very efficient at taking eggs. I think they must have had fledglings of their own at that time. Ravens nest very early, and it was during the period when the black-headed gulls were mostly just in situ. I think it was before the terns were really settling in any numbers, but the ravens were coming in and absolutely hoovering up the eggs. And despite being shouted at by wardens, by myself and others on the ridge, and sort of ran at speed, they just so intelligent birds. They know exactly what the range of your voice or your kind of capacity to get at them was, and they would just sort of stay out of reach and then come back and get another egg. But that predation incident didn't last. I think they finished fledging their chicks and the chicks moved on, and that wasn't a significant in the end issue, I don't think. And a lot of the black-headed gulls relayed, so it was okay. Other, natural phenomenon is like the larger gulls, great blackback in this case, sometimes herring gulls do sometimes become, persistent takers of eggs or chicks, mostly chicks really. Their chicks are a lot easier to sort of go in and grab rather than an egg. So they usually wait till later in the season and take the odd chick. But again, it's not usually considered a big problem. So we tend to sort of get through that issue okay. And it's part of, it's part of nature after all. An interesting one is the sort of relationship between black-headed gulls and sandwich terns. And we do observe quite a lot of kleptoparasitism, which is when they basically steal sandwich terns, sand eels as they're coming in. But we think overall that the relationship is beneficial. It's a sort of, it's worth it for the sandwich terns because they get that kind of guard dog role from the black-headed gulls. But as I said, we did have an issue with otters in 2017. We put up the electric fences the following year, and so far that seems to have solved the problem. They were getting out onto the islands at night that year in 2017 and taking chicks and taking young, but also I think terns respond differently to a sort of mammal predator at night, and they can just really desert. They just really don't like it. It's very upsetting to them en masse, and they just can decide that they don't want to do this. So that's why we had to put the fences up. Right, just going to talk quickly about food if I've got time. This is sand eels. We do some feeding studies there to try and monitor the size and species of fish coming in. We measure it sometimes according to the bill length of the tern. So that, this one would be maybe a 1 1/4, 1.5 bill length sand eel. So they come in thick and fast when they're feeding chicks, and it's a great opportunity from the ridge to be able to observe and record their diet. There's a bigger sand eel coming in, so as the chicks get bigger, they're looking for different optimum prey sometimes. These show you some of the different ones. That's a clupeid on the left, or sprat family, herring family fish, and then sand eel on the right. And we also sometimes see gadoids, which is like cod or haddock, saithe, that pollock, that sort of family of fish coming in, browner and square-tailed end. There's a sprat again, a clupeid, and there's another one with a sandwich tern. This was an interesting one from 2 years ago, I think, which when you zoom in, we reckon that is actually a mackerel, which we haven't really recorded before, and there's not much in the literature about sandwich terns taking mackerel, but it does seem to be a mackerel, and it's interesting that we've started to see that, and we saw a couple more this season. So that's another one to look out for, perhaps with changes to fish breeding locations and sea temperature rises, perhaps. Who knows? We're not sure where their breeding grounds are, but it's interesting. This is just a quick clip of sandwich terns feeding off Ymddiriedolaeth Island, probably Cemlyn birds. So it just shows you them when they're in the mood and finding food in close proximity to one another and diving in, plunge diving at speed. So sandwich terns can take different prey because they come in at greater speed. They're more powerful plunge divers than the two smaller species. So they can get a bit further down to get slightly bigger fish sometimes. Right. I'm going to try and speed up. This is just again a clip from 2020 with all those Arctic and commons making a big racket. And this is what it's all about at the end of the day, at the end of the season, is getting fledglings into the air. And this is the first ones to fledge are obviously the black-headed gulls, because they're the first ones to go down. And then usually followed by sandwich terns, because they come in. Sandwich terns arrive before the commons and Arctics in April is when they get going. And then for a while you see the the youngsters following the parents, and you'll see these birds around Anglesey and around North Wales then spreading out and still being fed by the parents for many weeks afterwards, so that you hear that sort of wheedling, whinging teenager call from the youngster calling for mum to feed it constantly, or dad, and they're still following the parents around at that stage. There's a young common tern getting fed. There's one just gone into the air, first flight, still quite stubby little tail and rounded wings, but making his first flight, and it's always a lovely thing to see that. And then this post-fledge period is really interesting, and there's been a lot of fantastic observation work being done in the last few years by people in North Wales, especially around the sort of Cross Point area and further east along the North Wales coast. People like Henry Cook and Julian Hughes and Mark Hughes and Rob Sandham have all been collecting data on colourings, particularly sandwich terns, but also other terns. And you can see some really interesting data, because when they leave the breeding colonies, it seems that all the tern species, in particular sandwich terns perhaps, it seems to be an important part of their ecology that they move around, find other terns, perhaps even visit other colonies in that post-fledge period, but certainly gathering with other terns. And we know from the ring reading data that they come from all over. We've had records of terns seen at Cross Point, for example, that have come from, well, a lot from Ireland, so both south and north, from other colonies in the UK, in Scotland, and in England, but also from the Netherlands. And I think even this year, I think I saw one from Denmark, which was interesting, and other places. So it's really fascinating that they gather here instead of just going south, which is what they could do, just go south to West Africa and South Africa, which is where they spend the winter. But they don't straight away. They go to these other places first, and that seems to be an important part of what they're about as a species, because otherwise they wouldn't waste time doing it. So yeah, it's interesting. So this is a nice little story. I don't know if you can see, if you can sort of zoom in, but the colouring on this bird that was ringed by Tony Cross down at Ynys Las in Ceredigion has got an interesting KFC. It is anyway. It's a KFC, and it's a red ring with white writing. So we thought that was an interesting one. He photographed. He ringed it there as a fledgling, probably a Cemlyn bird if it's a fledgling coming through in the autumn. Although not guarantee that it's Cemlyn bird, but it probably Cemlyn. But anyway, he ringed it there in the autumn, and then in the winter, the following winter, it was seen in South Africa. This was photographed down the southern tip of South Africa, KFC. And Code Tony did try and approach Kentucky Fried Chicken to see if they wanted to sponsor this fantastic story, but he didn't hear back from them. I think that's a wasted opportunity myself. But yeah, the colorings are designed to be able to read them in the field. 3 letter codes, so relatively easy to spot with a telescope if you can get close enough, and some really interesting data coming out of it. This is where they go in the winter. Looks nice, doesn't it? That's South Africa, mixed tern flocks, and that's their migration route. So they have stopping off points, and they're recorded from quite a few different countries in West Africa, but also right down Namibia, down to South Africa, right down here. And here's some of them at Cross Point. As the tide comes in over the rocks, you start seeing them gathering, sometimes in quite big numbers. And if you can get close enough to read the rings, it's a great opportunity. There they are. You can see in the winter, as they started to go into their sort of non-breeding plumage, sandwich terns have this kind of white forehead, looks as if they're going bald. which I've got some sympathy these days. That one's another colour ringed one. I'm not sure where it's from, but these different styles of rings from different countries. And these are ones which we started ringing at Cemlyn in 2019, did a batch of about 125 chicks with these little leg flags, which are very easy to read in the field. And we know, we've got some interesting records of them coming back now. This was one that was photographed in South Africa again as an adult, so he's made it through his first year or two. And these are the ones that were from the skerries. We knew that these were skerries birds that had come to Cemlyn because we knew from the flags, which Steve Dodd's team had been putting on skerries breeding population for the last few years. So it kind of proved what we already really knew, which was that they were skerries birds that had come into our colony in 2020. And that shows you some of the data from different origins of birds from different places. Some of them really fascinating, multiple colonies in Ireland and Anglesey, and it shows the sort of how mobile terns are as species, and how important it is that they have a kind of plan B if something happens at one colony, that they know where to go as an alternative. And I think that's more or less me for slides that I've put in. But if we've got time for, I hope I haven't gone over too long time-wise. If we've got some time for questions, I think there's just some general photos of.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you very much indeed. I think perhaps we have time for just one or two questions before I give a vote of thanks on everybody's behalf. Is there anybody out there who'd like to put a quick question to Ben?
Yeah, I've got. Can you hear me, Nigel?
Yeah.
Ben? Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Yeah. First of all, thank you very much, Ben. Absolutely loved it. I'm feeling a bit lazy because the weather's been a bit rubbish. I've not really been to Cemlyn much, but you kind of inspire me to sort of, well, especially for the spring. I'm looking forward to the spring and getting back there as well. So it's a fantastic talk. Yeah, just a few things. You were on about snow buntings. There has been one around on and off for about the last month, possibly two, but there was one seen on Rare Bird Alert yesterday. What was the other things? Oh yeah, you put up that picture of the possible hybrid. I'm in your camp there. I think it was definitely a pure roseate. Because I was lucky a couple of years ago, I managed to go to the skerries, and there was an adult hybrid roseate common there, so I got some photos of that, and it really is a mishmash between common and roseate. That was a good one to see, and yeah, just loved it. I mean, that's the thing. It's got so much. It's got all the birds and in May, June with all the sort of the flowers, it was fantastic, and insects, and we've got to try. Yeah, if you can get another BioBlitz this year, if that's possible, that would be fantastic, because that's such good fun for everyone involved, and for getting the youngsters on board as well. I just wanted to say, thank you very much, and if anyone's got any questions, that'd be brilliant.
Thanks, Steve, for that, and for the question and the comments. Anybody else who'd like to ask Ben a quick question?
Nigel, could I just,
this evening?
Martin, could I just, one of the things we raised when Julian's talk was on was whether or not the Arctic tern colony was the most southerly in the UK. And I've done a bit of internet searches since. I could find that some references to a couple of pairs down in Norfolk, but I'm not sure. That seems to be quite old material, so I'm not sure if they're still breeding in Norfolk, whether either directly or through the Wildlife Trust there. But it could be another crown for Cemlyn to wear as the most southerly colony of Arctic terns in the UK. So I'm not sure if you know anything about it.
Yeah, well, UK possibly. I mean, I know we used to get a couple of pairs in Ladies Island, which is southeast Ireland, Wexford. So that's geographically further south, obviously, but it's not the UK. There are colonies in southwest of Britain, in Scillies and in Dawlish. I think Dawlish Warren. I don't know whether they have any Arctics now. I think they have had in the past. I don't really know actually. It's not. I'll have to look at that. Yeah.
Hi, this is Simon. I think the Arctic terns still breed on Ysfeirig off Rosnaiga.
Oh, of course they do. Yeah.
So I'm afraid
that's further south. Yeah.
that's a wee bit further south.
Yeah, you're right.
But look, fortunately, they're still have good foothold there.
Still an Anglesey plus though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, really, we shouldn't be talking about Cemlyn terns or whatever. It's Anglesey terns. It's Irish sea terns, in fact. You know, and that's the beauty of that, all that interreg work over the years, is that we do now think of them as just Irish sea birds. You know, whether they choose to nest in, you know, in Cemlyn or in Skerries or Veirig or Ladies Island, we should be thinking of them as one population, really.
Yeah, it's one big meta population because they're all interconnected, aren't they? Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's really nice the way that RSPB and Wildlife Trust and the others have sort of got together around that way of looking at it over the years, I think.
Yes, I'm sure there's a pointer for political life in all of those sentiments, and being more collaborative and coming up with such great solutions like you've described tonight.
Can I just ask something?
Yes, please go ahead. Who's that?
Ben, I was there earlier this year with a Wildlife Trust walk, and I was appalled, and I can only say that there were so many people there. There were so many cars, and I just wonder in future, you know, that they're not going to go away, but how do you manage a situation like that where you've got disturbance? I mean, I was shouting at two men that were actually walking on the beach where the turnstones were nesting, and I shouted at them. Well, I just couldn't help myself, and they had a Labrador with them as well. And when I shouted at them, they came across to me and they apologized because they'd no idea what they were disturbing and the birds they were disturbing. So whether you should put up more signs or whether you should control the number of people more, I just don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
No, well, you're right to raise it, and it's something I didn't mention in the talk, but it's something that, you know, just the last 2 seasons have really highlighted to us because of, you know, firstly because of people staying in this country that might otherwise have been, you know, going for their summer holidays somewhere else. So sort of people visiting that perhaps weren't used to visiting that kind of place and didn't, you know, maybe didn't realize, like you say, so the behavior was different. But also just the sheer number, like you said, the sheer volume of visitors has jumped up, and it does raise issues. And I mean, what you find is, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, but you know, most people are great. You know, most people see signs, respect the fact that it's a nature reserve, put their dog on a lead if they've got one, and, you know, generally want to sort of do the right thing and would be horrified to think that they would have any negative effect on the birds or the wildlife. But, you know, there will always be a kind of small percentage of people who don't behave like that. And the trouble is, if you massively increase the overall number of visitors, you therefore increase the number of people who are going to be a problem, and the number of dogs that are going to be off the lead, you know, and it's the sheer volume. Also, the number of people who have dogs has gone up during the pandemic. So that itself creates another issue, because dogs are a particular problem at Cemlyn. And that was illustrated by one incident in 2020 where there was just a period for, like, I think it was only for a quarter of an hour, where there wasn't somebody on the ridge. There wasn't a warden on the ridge because, you know, it was a changeover between 2 people. And during that period, just bad luck, somebody's dog was off the lead. It was an old dog. It was deaf apparently, and the owner couldn't couldn't sort of shout it off, but it went out onto the island, broke the electric fence, was careering around for 5 or 10 minutes, caused huge uproar. The birds were sort of very unsettled for days afterwards. We don't know whether it caused any actual death of terns, but it was certainly a big sort of disturbance incident. And that was just one
Yes.
dog and one incident where there just happened to be nobody on the ridge. But even if there had been somebody on the ridge, they would have to spend that time chasing the dog, talking to the owner, when they could be wardening terns and talking to people and so on. So it is an issue. You're right to highlight it. As to what we do with it, I mean, we've put up as many signs as as we think is sort of reasonable, but people don't always respect them. People don't always read them, and we put up a sort of a physical barrier, which is the rope line, and we have wardens there throughout, and that's more or less all we can do for now, I think. But there is a question that going forward where we want to encourage people to come to Cemlyn. We want people to engage with these birds and see them and be inspired and sort of hopefully get involved in conservation as a result, or at least understand the issues. So you want people to be there and experience it. But as you say, sheer volume does create more issues, and whether that means we need more resources for wardening, so that there are people who are just there to manage people, as it were, and then some other wardens who can concentrate on the birds. Because what's hard when you're out there on the ridge is you can't do both. You've got to prioritize, and if it's an emergency issue like a dog off the lead or somebody sort of creating a problem, you have to go and deal with it. Meanwhile, you're not there for the turn. So whether it's trying to find extra funding for more wardens or different kinds of support from volunteers who could sort of try and manage the visitor pressure. I think that's the way to look at it, is it's managing it. I can't think of a good way of actually limiting the numbers. I mean, apart from, the actual limit of the car park itself, which, by the way, is also under threat in the long term from sea level rise. So, that will create a different sort of set of questions for the National Trust in the end as well. Parking at Cemlyn will be a thing. But as to what we do on site, I think it's about welcoming people, but trying to make sure that they are understanding how to behave, and crucially keeping dogs on a lead. I think that's a really, really important one.
Thank you.
Thank you for tracking that, Gina. I think it rightly illustrates one of the key reasons that the Wildlife Trust wants to secure wardening for this year and for the future, and how very important it is. 24/7 wardening at sites as important and popular as Cemlyn is absolutely vital if they're going to do what they're there for. And it gives me an opportunity to raise the wardening appeal, which the Wildlife Trust have launched again this year, to try and secure sufficient wardening for this coming season. And I hope people listening tonight will now properly understand how vital that work is and consider donating to the Wildlife Trust's appeal. And details of that can be found on the email alert that we sent round, or if you go on to the Wildlife Trust's webpage. And surely there can't be many more local conservation issues that are more worthy of your support. I'd like to echo Steve's sentiments right at the beginning there, Ben. It was a marvelous talk and absolutely inspiring at this stage of the year in January, when we're all beginning to look forward to the breeding season. You really brought it home to us so intimately, both through your very vivid personal commentary and your wonderful illustrations, images. They don't need to all be sharp and professional. It's the overall picture that they convey, which I think was so successful tonight. Those images of roseates, rockabill roseates in a sort of gem of a sea off Rockabill there, and the raven taking the egg, illustrating, how fickle life can be for a tern, and indeed for a tern warden. You really brought it home to us how many different aspects of wardening there are at Cemlyn, how complex the job is, how many people are involved, how many aspects of wildlife have to be considered to make it all work. I learned so much this evening, yet I felt I already knew about Cemlyn, but I certainly didn't. You've opened my eyes to lots of things this evening in a lovely, gentle way, and yet with really strong messages. And by the way, this problem that Jean alluded to, and which is clearly a big problem nationwide now for species like ringed plover, is highlighted in this month's British Wildlife Journal paper from Norfolk, looking at ringed plover problems in particular. So some of these are local issues, but many of them are national ones. And the other great thing I think about the talk this evening is that you, you did involve lots of other agencies, lots of other countries, making us fully aware that this isn't just a local interest and local issue. This is part of a much wider scheme of life that involves many other species in many other countries and continents. And Cemlyn is a part of that, a very important part, but everything else has to work for the long-term success of species as important as our terns. But I think it was a triumph, and I think we're all in awe of the effort and commitment that you and other wardens in the past have put into Cemlyn. It's been succor to some amazing people, some who've been an important part of Bird Group, like David Wright, others who've gone on to great things like Mike Dilger, have all learned so much through their time at Cemlyn. It's had a real influence, a heartfelt influence, I think, which came through in your commentary this evening. It obviously nurtured you as a young naturalist in the early days. It then gave you that intimate experience as a young man when you lived Cemlyn and other wild rocky islets 24/7, and that came over beautifully. Thank you for that. And now, as an experienced naturalist and conservationist and ecologist, you can take a much more strategic overview of Cemlyn's role, both in pure conservation terms and also in educating people about conservation in general, which you're so good at and which Cemlyn is so good at. And good for you for making full use of this wonderful natural facility that the Wildlife Trust manages so wonderfully well. I hope that, like me, people will be streaming in a proper way to see what Cemlyn has to offer this summer, and that we will all give it our individual support in whatever way we can. Good luck with all your efforts. Good luck to the terns in particular this coming year. And thank you again for all your time in putting the talk together and talking to us this evening, Ben. It's got our new spring season to a fly. We're very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. That's very kind. Diolch.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben.
Seeing everybody next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everybody.
See everyone.